Marvel's Spider-Man 2, which follows 2018's Marvel's Spider-Man and 2020's Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, is the third entry in Insomniac's Sony-produced Spider-Man franchise. The first two games, which took inspiration and borrowed concepts and ideas from Rocksteady's revered Batman Arkham franchise, were massive hits for both Sony and the PlayStation brand, with the first game having sold over 20 million units. The second mainline entry promised to introduce new villains into the mix, which includes Spider-Man fan favorite villain Venom, along with having two Spider-Men playable with both Peter Parker and Miles Morales. With 3 years of anticipation built since the last entry, Spider-Man 2 was released this past weekend to astounding acclaim. Having just spent over 16 hours with the main story on spectacular difficulty, I have found the game to be a remarkable achievement for Insomniac games. A number of improvements have been made with the speed of the combat and traversal systems, which have also been sped up significantly. Exploration has been greatly improved with the implementation of gliding via the web wings mechanic that both characters can use. This mechanic, which gives Spider-Man that Superman effect, is meant to be used in conjunction with pockets and streams of air scattered throughout specific areas of the city. The slingshot mechanic can be used to traverse large sections, entire districts of New York within seconds. Swinging has been sped up without losing the control or fluidity of movement. Both Peter and Miles have gained a number of new swing animations that appears to be plucked out of multiple Spider-Man comics in order to avoid the feeling of repetition and introduce a new feel for the mechanic. On the other hand, combat has been significantly improved as well, introducing a new parry system that's heavily emphasized in every combat encounter. New mechanics such as switching positions with enemies in midair to avoid gunfire and disarming gun henchmen at a distance within an instant is now possible. Gadgets have been streamlined down to just 4 per character, avoiding the unnecessary excess of gadgets that didn't have much purpose like the first game. Duo takedown animations with both characters have been added as well, but interestingly not co-op, as Insomniac has expressed wanting to focus on and deliver solely a single-player experience to the audience. In terms of customization and content, the amount of suits available to unlock in the game have seemingly doubled, with several of them having different colored variants for both characters. Individual suit perks have been removed, likely to avoid enticing the player to use one over the one they actually want to use, further simplifying the system. And with regards to content, new activities are available, be them combat and traversal challenges, that introduce new enemy types, be them Kraven's Hunter Army or Venom's Symbiote Army that consumes the citizens of New York and turns them into mindless homicidal alien zombies, along with collection pickups scattered throughout the city. However, most of this is simply repetition for the sake of repetition instead of carrying or adding anything of importance to the main narrative. Finally, Spider-Man 2 in its closing hours does leave the player with some intriguing revelations about upcoming characters and future entries, including a tease of Norman Osborn's transformation into Green Goblin. Cindy Moon is introduced, providing a tease of female spider superhero Silk, a possible third playable spider character. Both Carnage and Chameleon are teased in 2 of the game's side missions, the later likely to be included in future DLC, while the former could be implemented likely as a main antagonist for the next game. Finally, Doc Ock teases a plan known as the Final Chapter, which could be pointing to Insomniac's plan to implement a version of my personal favorite incarnation of Spider-Man, the Superior storyline, in which Doc Ock takes over Peter Parker's body after his death, and he becomes the new Superior Spider-Man. Overall, Spider-Man 2 is a fantastic game that builds on the foundations laid by the first 2 entries and leaves plenty of fresh ideas for multiple sequels, both spin-offs and mainline entries. But as great as the game is, the real question is, what does this game actually do that's new and different for the superhero genre? What does this game bring to the table to switch things up? The answer is simple. It doesn't. This game brings absolutely nothing new to the superhero genre. It doesn't introduce any unique ideas or concepts that haven't been done before to any capacity with regards to its open world, which is full of repetitive busy work. And it especially doesn't bring anything new to the table for first-party Sony exclusives, and that's kind of a problem. The formula for first-party Sony exclusives has been laid out on full display for years, and they're becoming quite predictable. With these games, most of them are good for the limited runtime that they offer, but they don't offer much of anything beyond that initial first run, mainly due to the fact that they are single-player games. At their core, Sony exclusives are narrative-driven games where the story comes first and everything else comes second. And the trade-off is that while you usually get a strong story to chew into, the gameplay can take a beating or vice versa. A prime example would be God of War 2018, and especially The Last of Us Part 2, whose quality when it came to storytelling was extremely below the standard of what consumers should expect from the head of the big three. Spider-Man 2, however, does avoid this trapping as both the story and the gameplay are handled with extreme care and attention to fine detail. A bigger problem, though, that Spider-Man suffers from is the most important element of its formula, and that's the open world of New York City. At no point does this game feel like more than just a rehash of the same playground that Insomniac introduced years ago. Now, granted, there's only so many different ways that you can build a believable New York in a video game, and the city is Spider-Man's home. Nevertheless, there are things that Insomniac could do to make the city feel more alive and less like the virtual backdrop that it is. For instance, what if the player landed on a car in the game and the NPC driving that car stepped out to question why Spider-Man is damaging their vehicle? What if there was a system that was implemented to where the player could see NPCs interacting with each other inside buildings as Spider-Man is scaling a tall building on the outside? Using another example, what if Spider-Man could use a helicopter and travel to the Statue of Liberty by air? I mean, you could do so in Spider-Man 2, a game that was released back in 2004. What if Insomniac emphasized Peter's aptitude for science and he had to play detective to solve a murder? Both the Assassin's Creed and Batman Arkham franchises played around with this idea and both were effective at doing so. What if instead of playing as a popular character like Venom or Mary Jane for a brief, tightly scripted level, that those characters had their own mini campaigns, and you could actually play entire missions with them? That they were implemented as actual playable characters instead of brief interactive cameos. But wait, Mary Jane's sections are boring. Ergo, no one liked the stealth missions with her from the first game. Well, I beg to differ. I'd argue that playing as Mary Jane actually broke up the repetition of the Spider-Man gameplay and gave the developers a chance to play around with some different genres, like stealth, or a third-person cover shooter. As it turns out, instead of the devs doing the dumb thing and listening to the loud minority on the internet who don't know anything of what they're complaining about, they brought Mary Jane back, and not only did they bring her back, but they made the Mary Jane stuff some of the most creative sections in the entire game. Shocking, I know. But did they go far enough? I'd argue that they didn't. For example, we learned during one of those stages with Mary Jane that Kraven killed not just Scorpion, but he also murdered Shocker, Vulture, and Electro. How Kraven took on Electro and won would be something exciting to see, but we never get to see these events take place. Even though it's great from the narrative perspective because it emphasizes just how ferocious and brutal and psychotic and terrifying and dangerous Kraven truly is, how great would it have been if the devs at Insomniac actually made these moments playable and made Kraven playable? My imagination is just swimming with the possibilities. Imagine a boss fight with Vulture, with Shocker, with Electro as Kraven the Hunter. And not that garbage Russian accentless Aaron Taylor Johnson version, but the real, true, authentic comic book Kraven like in the game, taking on these three unique Spider-Man villains. Maybe he even took them on handicap 3-1 and still came out on top. Now that would have been something to see. Or maybe Kraven did to them what he did with Miles and Mr. Negative and threw two of them in a battle arena and had them kill each other. The victor fights Kraven. They could have had us playing as Vulture or Electro. How amazing would that have been? This is the problem with Marvel's Spider-Man 2. As great as it is, as fun as it rarely goes far enough to actually be creative. I don't want my words twisted. Playing as Venom for 15 minutes was fun, but it was already done in 2006. Playing as Mary Jane going solid Snake was great, but it didn't last that long. The game needs more of these ideas and more fleshed out in terms of length than what is currently presented in this game. If Insomniac implemented more of these things and played around with some of the ideas I mentioned previously, I have no doubt that these games could win Game of the Year. Why? Because it would be the greatest superhero video game of all time. But currently, that game was before Spider-Man 2 came out and still is Batman Arkham City. But if you look at Batman Arkham City and what it accomplished, it's mind-blowing how Spider-Man is just as good as Arkham City, but it's not better than Arkham City. That's the issue. I want it to be better because Spider-Man is my favorite superhero, not Batman. Bats is a strong runner-up, but Spidey is my go-to favorite. In fact, a perfect example of how Batman Arkham is better than Spider-Man is in its combat system. In Spider-Man, you can't parry more than one enemy at a time. In Batman Arkham, you can parry up to 3 different enemies at once. The gadgets are also more useful in Batman Arkham. In these Spider-Man games, you could largely ignore the gadgets except in the rare occasion where they're useful in a particular situation. Another perfect example of how Batman Arkham is better, Arkham City specifically, is in its emphasis on highlighting its villains. Batman's Rogues Gallery still has a strong presence in those games, even when they're not actually in the game. This is something that the first Spider-Man game actually did better than the second. Where are the character-specific collectibles? Those items were important because they told a story, gave context to the world and characters that were not expressed visually on screen.
The menu from my first real date with MJ. Wish I could have afforded someplace fancier, but she didn't seem to mind.
Spider-Man 2 fails at this on every level because it doesn't even try. Insomniac could have brought those collectibles back, but actually made them briefly playable mini-levels, so you could actually see what happened as it happened. The difference is that they would be playable, and the player would have hands-on experience with those events, which would further make them relevant. Arkham City even highlighted the villains that were actually in the game when they weren't on screen anywhere close to Batman's actual position with the announcements they would make throughout Arkham City. Neither Kraven nor the Lizard have this level of presence by comparison. Venom does to an extent, but his is entirely scripted. It's those moments that happen in the gameplay itself that's not a scripted event that matters most, because they're moments that are unexpected. This is why Batman Arkham City went on to become a Game of the Year nominee, and why it's earned the reputation it has. Spider-Man 2 was a great experience, but how much better could it have been if they had just taken it a step further? There were plenty of opportunities in the game to do just that, and Insomniac missed them. What open world games need is a game that presents a fun open world to traverse that doesn't rely on collectibles or takes the concept of collectibles and does something different with them, something new. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a great experience, but it can be summed up in one word: refinement. The superhero genre doesn't need refinement. What the superhero genre needs is revolution. What's needed is a game that has more varied gameplay and genre ideas that aren't limited to brief 15-minute sprints or scripted moments. With Insomniac's Wolverine on the way, here's hoping they capitalize on that and gives the genre fresh ideas that will give it a new perspective. And if not Insomniac, then perhaps EA's upcoming Iron Man or Black Panther games, or Monolith's Wonder Woman. The superhero genre needs revolution. It needs new ideas, and hopefully one or more of these titles supplies the demand for innovation.